for some of you. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the co-chairs of the Issue-Based Coalition on Environment and Climate Change, UNESCO, UNEP, UNECE, but also on behalf of its members to this webinar on incorporating global environment and climate change agendas at the national level in the forthcoming UNSDCFs and CCAs. The webinar is organized in response to very concrete requests. So we did not just invent something because the IBC is so much focused towards the real needs. And so in the beginning of this year, we made a survey of the country teams, and we found out what are the topics that are interesting for you. And today's is one of them, and this is now the first in a series that will be delivered by the IBC with a view to enhance the understanding of mainstreaming global environmental agendas at the country level. The seminar today will be focusing mainly on two things. One, as said, on the environmental mainstreaming guidelines, which were previously produced by the IBC. And the second main focus will be on co-sharing your experiences across climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution transitions. As you know, currently 12 countries are about to undertake UNSD cooperation frameworks, evaluations, and they are preparing for the Common Country Analyses. Therefore, it is for us from IBC important to organize this webinar to focus on integrating environment and climate change considerations as said into the Common Country Analysis. In addition to presenting relevant parts from the mainstreaming guidance, as already mentioned, we will also have a segment where colleagues from the two countries will share their experiences. This is all meant to strengthen collaboration, interagency collaboration on environmental dimensions of the cooperation frameworks. Now, the first part of the webinar will be presenting these main approaches, but also its key areas of work. And a third part will be to offer you a refresher presentation on IBC's guidance in the integration of environmental and climate changes in the CCAs. And please note that the first part of the webinar we would like to record to allow to share this information also for those colleagues who do not have the opportunity to join today's webinar. But for your information, the second part, which is on the experience sharing, it won't be recorded. So you are free and open to have frank discussions, and I would really encourage you to share your own experiences. Are they good or bad? And also the challenges ahead and the lessons learned from the process that you witnessed from preparing the CCAs. Well, in addition to all that, I would like you to encourage to express your ideas for future topics that the IBC could cover in such kind of webinars for supporting you and your work. Because it's important for us that the IBC remains demand-driven. So your ideas and suggestions would form a basis for our future work. Now, having said all that, let me hand over to my colleague Sarah, who will now give you a brief presentation on the IBC for those colleagues who maybe freshly joined the country teams and who would like to have a very quick start in all that. As you know, the IBC was established in 2020, and Sarah will now talk about briefly the approach and the modality of the work of the IBC. So with that, dear colleagues, I wish you a fruitful and interesting discussion. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Marco. Good morning and good afternoon, dear colleagues. As Marco mentioned, I would like to make a very brief presentation on the IBC on behalf of the core team of IBC. Next slide, please. The UN system reform resulted in the establishment of so-called the Regional Collaborative Platform, which is uniting all UN agencies working on the sustainable development to ensure that the agencies are fully coordinated to address key challenges countries in the region. And as part of that reform, the issue-based coalitions were also established to act as regional task forces to facilitate cooperation and also coordination between UN agencies and partners. In Europe and Central Asia, we have 7 IBCs, which are focusing on health, gender, youth, social protection, migration, sustainable food systems, and also including our IBC, which is focused on environment and climate change. I would like to also mention that there are 2 regional interagency groups working also on data and statistics and digital transformation. Next slide, please. So the main objectives of our IBC, issue-based coalition on environment and climate change, and as this is also stated in our terms of reference, is firstly to promote coordinated support to the member states in implementation of the 2030 agenda, the very broad scope, but more specifically in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and also other multilateral environmental agreements or conventions. And secondly, one of our main objectives is to support UN cities, country teams on environment and climate issues at the country level. Next slide, please. The issue-based coalition is open to all UN agencies, funds, and programs. Currently, we have 17 member agencies. The logos of those agencies you see on the screen. And the IBC is co-chaired by 3 agencies, UNECE, UNEP, and UNESCO. Next slide, please. Our work at the IBC is based around 3 pillars. So you see them also on the screen. The first pillar is on strengthening environmental and climate change governance and implementing the 2030 agenda. So under this pillar of work, we are providing support, policy support at national and regional level, and also providing guidance on various areas such as climate action, biodiversity protection, circular economy, just transition, and so on. The second pillar, and in our view, it's also most important pillar, is providing support to country teams in the environment and climate change dimension of cooperation frameworks and common country analysis. We engage with country teams in a demand-driven manner to provide support, especially strengthening the environment and climate change dimension of the cooperation framework and CCAs. And also for that work, we use our guidance materials. And today's webinar is, in fact, one of the activities we are organizing under this pillar. The third pillar is on sharing IBC resources with UN country teams, and particular sharing available data, statistics, existing tools and assessment at both national and regional level. Next slide, please. So you can see all those thematic areas we are covering under the IBC. So it starts with climate change, GRR, biodiversity, air pollution, sustainable consumption production, water management, food security. Colleagues, please mute your microphone. Thank you. Sustainable infrastructure. And also we are working on cross-cutting themes such as environment and youth, environment and gender, migration, and also human rights. And several agencies work together under the task team to focus on these areas of work. And the task teams are led by 2 to 3 agencies. So next slide, please. So this is our main support modalities. So as I mentioned previously, we are providing policy advice to resident coordinators and UNCTs. So for example, we are developing guidance materials, recommendations, and also we are producing key messages on environment and climate change issues. Secondly, we provide advisory services to UN country teams, as I previously mentioned, on demand-driven manner. These are provision of guidance and checklists on strengthening environment and climate change dimension of cooperation framework and CCAs. And also we provide expertise in the analysis of environment and climate change of CCAs in coordination with the peer support group, which is through the Regional Development Coordination Office. Capacity development is also one of the support modalities. So we organize trainings, webinars, and workshops. Knowledge products are also disseminated through our RCP website, and national and regional level are also, of course, focus of our work, but we are looking into also transboundary aspects of environmental issues. So we have a very active area which is related to transboundary water management and also air pollution. So outreach and communication, of course, as I mentioned, so we share all our available materials and resources with UNCTs. And we also act as a contact point for requests by resident coordinators and UNCTs. Next slide, please. So as Marco mentioned, the IBC was established in 2020. So as you can imagine that the many different activities were already organized. But just to illustrate like what we organize, we've put together here like some of the activities and events we organized in 2023 and the first half of this year in 2024. So these, for example, there was a first in-person workshop, a regional workshop on integrating climate change, pollution, biodiversity, and just transition in this cooperation framework processes. Some of you might have participated in that workshop, which was also appreciated a lot by participants and UNCT colleagues. So we organized biodiversity webinar for UNCTs, and we also organized the informal discussion on water cooperation, specifically focusing on transboundary water cooperation in Central Asia last year. So, and also we provide targeted support to specific countries. For example, in Georgia, there was a webinar on nexus of climate change and leaving no one behind. In Turkmenistan, we organized a webinar on disability inclusive climate change adaptation. In Kazakhstan, we also facilitated informal discussion on achieving water-related SDGs. And in 2024, we already organized a number of events in Tajikistan on integrating environment through the different pillars of cooperation framework, and in Kazakhstan focused on just transition, and in Moldova on sustainable forest management. So you can see that we cover like a number of different areas under the IBC work. So I have, next slide, please. I have 1 minute left for my presentation, but the last 2 slides, and you will have this copy of presentation after the webinar. So you will see how you can basically see available resources, both offline and online. Next slide, please. And you can see here the links to available materials, which is I mentioned and on the RCP website. And please feel free to write to us, and our email address is there, IBC Environment and Climate. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I will hand over to my colleague at the core team, Marika. Marika, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello to all colleagues. I'm Marika Palosaari, and I work with the UNEP at its Europe office in Geneva. Without any further ado, let me move to my quick presentation. This will be a brief overview, as said earlier, of the comprehensive guidance note that was published 3 years ago. And in the interest of allowing ample time today for discussion and exchange of experience, I will keep my remarks concise, and I encourage you to consult the full guidance note, which can be found via the link in the chat. Some of you may be already familiar with this content, and certainly you are familiar with the cooperation framework cycle as such, while for others, the integration of environment climate aspects maybe something a little bit more new, but in any case, I will try to highlight just the key points, and then later we will draw from your collective experience to have an interaction on these issues that we're highlighting today. So let's begin by discussing the expected outcomes of mainstreaming. Why do we try to integrate environment and climate change into UN programming? We do that mainly, of course, to help to identify and address the risks and challenges related to climate change and environment. But it's important to keep in mind that this is not only for the sake of this pillar, but it is for the sake of understanding that if these risks are not identified, the other development goals could be jeopardized. And identification and integration of climate and environment can prevent negative impacts of other development projects. And when we identify the opportunities to enhance positive environment and climate related benefits, we can then foster sustainable, low emission and resilient development. Also, this process of integrating environment and climate can help to identify indicators to measure progress toward sustainable development, of course. Furthermore, effective mainstreaming ensures that the UN programming contributes to all the key aspects of the triple planetary crisis, including, of course, the biodiversity. It can help to enhance ecosystem services, promote sustainable use of natural resources, and ensuring fair sharing of benefits from different resources. Climate change is something, of course, that is nowadays covered by most of the cooperation frameworks, but we would also like to see, or we would need to focus a little bit more on the pollution aspect, including climate pollutants, water contamination, efficient resource use, and of course minimizing waste and ensuring things like environmentally sound pest management. And obviously environment climate integration also includes safeguarding communities from exposure to disaster risk, diseases, hazardous materials, etc. And all these needs to be done considering these issues systematically embedding all of these considerations throughout the whole UN Sustainable Development Cooperation process. Next slide, please. But today we will mostly focus on the CCA part and the cooperation framework development phases of the cycle. The guidance note covers all of these different steps, although also that focus is mainly on the CCA and the cooperation framework. So let's go. Yeah, indeed. Let's look now into the preparation steps and the recommended mainstreaming actions within all of these steps of developing a CCA. Of course, the work starts by integrating the environment and climate into the methodology and the work plan. And this is actually, it sounds obvious, but I think it's a super important phase, because this is where we need to ensure that there's also enough time for collaboration and coordination among the agencies, because we want to really integrate and we want to have a holistic approach. So putting a couple of agencies to work on something like a planet pillar or just the environment and climate dimension will not do the job. So there needs to be ample time to make sure that environment climate experts take part throughout the process. Sometimes this may need also a budget for this purpose, bringing in also external experts, and the consideration of budget, time, collaboration and coordination are of course the initial steps, and if not done well, may not be possible then to take care of the following steps properly. Then obviously, like in every CCA, the work is started with analyzing the development context, and already here the environment climate issues should be considered in the broader context of the development and included in the methodology and work plan in the following steps. These steps include, of course, identification of the development priorities and needs, including the implementation of the commitments under the relevant internationally agreed norms, standards, and different frameworks. One of the reasons why we are organizing this webinar and the following webinars was that many of the country teams feel that they need more support in linking the CCA and the cooperation framework development with the global agendas, the key agreements, conventions, Paris Agreement, biodiversity, Sendai, etc. So identifying these different priorities and commitments also under the MEAs and other relevant standards is an important part of the CCA process. Then moving on, next step is also to, of course, to assess the progress towards the SDGs and the targets related to environment, climate change, but also the progress within the non-environmental SDGs, because the links exist and we want to have a comprehensive approach. Next slide, please. Then an important aspect, of course, is to identify risk, significance of drivers of risks that could impact progress towards the SDGs. And here we're, of course, going to look into the risks associated with environmental degradation and impacts of climate change, but also environment and climate-related risks that may affect the other development goals. And if this step is not done, that could prevent the country from accelerating progress on the SDGs in the other areas. Then next step is to identify the main obstacles, the main bottlenecks that prevent the country in achieving progress in these areas. And finally, to provide also analysis on domestic, foreign, public and private finance for SDGs. This is obviously a super important step, because if the investments and financing are not there, it's not possible to make progress during the cycle. Let's move forward to next slide. Here, I just want to give you an example of the different tools that the guidance note includes, because it is a sort of a manual for working on the CCAs and cooperation framework. So there are several checklists, examples, guiding questions, etc. What you see here is an example of a matrix identifying synergies between environment and other development issues, and there's a very simple scale that will show you if the link is strong or not strong. But application of this type of simple matrix may help to identify the synergies that are not immediately obvious, but that are nonetheless relevant. And this can then help to make sure that environment, climate are considered across the whole CCA, the different sections of it, including governance. By the way, it's often forgotten from the governance part. Next slide. Here you will see another table. This table is one of the examples of the kind of planning tools that we have in the node. This is a sort of a snapshot of the priorities that a country has identified vis-a-vis environment and climate. This kind of table format for analysis can be used to see again what are the commitments under the relevant international, regional and transboundary multilateral environmental agreements, and this kind of analysis can contain then the list of these MEAs, the country's commitments to different norms and standards, and this can help to analyze what are perhaps the most difficult conventions or commitments for the country to implement, and it can help to guide the thinking towards what is the country's capacity to implement, and if the, for example, environment and climate related expertise is in the right parts of the government structures, so that it's actually possible to implement the commitments. And then again, that can help the UN country team to understand how they can best help the government to fulfill its commitments. Next slide. Now here we move to already to look into the cooperation framework design and the different steps there, and how the mainstreaming is related to that part of the process. So obviously the overall objective here is that the country team identifies and proceeds toward the SDGs in a low carbon and climate resilient development without degrading environment and depleting the natural resources. The steps include first of all, creating an enabling environment for mainstreaming. So this means that the team needs to include the relevant experts. It means that the country team should have a mechanism for exchange among the experts, for enough communication and cooperation, including again with the non-environmental development aspects of the process. The next step is to confirm what the issues are. This is, of course, if well done, easy to do based on the CCA. Confirm the key risks and challenges. And then based on that, also in this step, it's important to report on the status and progress of the relevant SDGs that have been established in the CCA, and report also through the evidence-based voluntary national reviews. Next slide. In the next step then, the environment and climate issues are integrated in the priorities and theory of change, and during then the visioning exercise we can build on the CCA's causal analysis, identify the links between the different development solutions, and if needed, and if the level of detail in part of the cooperation framework is sufficient, we can again use the simple matrices or problem trees to identify the links. This can then help to identify the gaps with non-environmental development areas that need to be addressed in order to tackle the climate change and environmental degradation in a comprehensive manner. Then becomes the very, very important part, which is integrating the issues into the results framework. And this comprises, of course, of again identifying the synergies and of working on the impact analysis, looking into how the proposed development result may affect the achievement of environment and climate change objectives, and how action towards achieving environment and climate change priorities can contribute to better development results. So both aspects need to be considered. And here, of course, as you know, the recommendation is to formulate at least one outcome and related outputs, specifically focusing on addressing environment and climate change, but that's not enough. Again, we need to also reflect on how environment and climate dimension include the environment and climate change dimension into the relevant non-environmental development outcomes that are part of the cooperation framework. Then obviously, identification of indicators is an important part, and each outcome and output supporting the environment climate sensitive approach should be linked to the relevant SDG-based indicators. Finally, identification of partnerships is very important. Already at this stage, it's important to consider these and also obviously integrate environment and climate into the country team configuration. Next slide. I just want to have a quick look and zoom in also to one important part of the process, namely the impact assessment. And that's obviously an important opportunity to see how a proposed, let's say, economic development goal may affect the achievement of environment and climate change objectives and outcomes. And on the table there, you will see we have selected a priority, improved governance and outcomes governance systems, and then identified how certain actions can affect environment and climate change, or how actually inaction in certain area can compromise an achievement of a development result. So let's say that and part of the government that is responsible for MEAs does not have capacity to do that. The goals or the targets are jeopardized. I think it's time to move on again. So here I already mentioned that the guidance note is full of different checklists and tools, but there are also obviously many other resources available provided by the UN system, the DCO, and many agencies. Here you see some examples of them. You will get this presentation, and through that you will get the links to these different resources available. I want to highlight some environment climate specific resources. Next slide. And in this context, I want to mention specifically UNEP's Digital Accelerator Lab. This lab is fairly new. It's basically a platform offering different tools and resources that you will need when turning data into actionable insights on climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. Here you see a selection of some of the tools and platforms that you will find within this accelerator lab. I can tell you that, for example, having recently worked myself on the CCA, on the new CCA for Turkey, we found the SCP had a tool very helpful. It's a very helpful tool for identifying hotspots for sustainable consumption and production. And there are many other very helpful tools there. So time for me to stop here and hand over to my colleague Jing. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marika. So